You're listening to the PJF Podcast, a show dedicated to decoding elite sports performance and fitness. I'm Paul Fabritz, and I'm an MBA strength and conditioning and performance trainer. If you want to become superhuman, take your fitness, and take your sports performance to the next level, this is the podcast for you. Let's do it. All right, guys, so we got a special guest today. We have Andy Bryant, great podiatrist from Melbourne. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so he does some great work that I've seen on social media, and I've been following him for a while. We talk all the time on our podcast about foot training, so it's awesome to have an actual expert in this area. So you want to give a quick background on who you are and how you got into this?
Yeah, so I'm a podiatrist for 20 years now, and I was just like the regular podiatrist. And here in Australia, we're not like the American podiatrists. We're more like an allied health, more like a physical therapist. But so we're not a medical doctor to start with. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so yeah, I was just doing regular podiatry for the first 15 years, and then which is a lot of orthotics and just what most podiatrists do. And then just in my own practice of yoga and strength and conditioning, I noticed the barefoot movement was something that I was noticing for myself, and then I just started applying it to my clients as well. And it's just been transformational to my practice and my life pretty much.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, you want to talk a little bit about, you're big on kind of the zero drop shoes, correct? And so something we've talked a lot on our podcast about before is, the shoe that we're spending the majority of our time in, our foot is going to shape to that. So we want something that's flexible. We've talked about that. We want something that's kind of low to the ground. We're not, walking on a sofa cushion. But the one thing that I learned from your page is that we also want something that is flat from the heel to the toe. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when that's how our foot is naturally meant to be at its in its resting position, not standing on a heel. Basically, a lot of our shoes have a heel in them, and so your whole posture is having to change to accommodate that. And we do it almost immediately. Like we get so used to it that when people put on a shoe that's flat, they feel like they're falling backwards sometimes, which is pretty amazing to see. In terms of basketball, when our ankle is in that position on a bit of a hill, it's not as stable, and so we're far more likely to do an ankle injury if we're just shooting around in our trainers, in like your Nikes or something like that have that higher heel. And so really to be flat puts our ankle back into its correct position. That's a far more stable position. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be much. It might only be a centimetre, but that means you're not in your most stable position for function. And so it has far-reaching effects all the way up to your thoracic and your neck if you're constantly on a hill, basically, in your shoe. It also changes the way you run because you're more likely to strike very heavily on your heel. I think that's probably one of the most important things about what I'm on about, minimalist footwear. To be flat is to be back to your natural state.
Yeah. So you have some good posts that kind of illustrate the postural adaptations to that heel lift. And so I really like the one where you were you had your heel up on like a little book, and you were showing how it's kind of like, it pitches you forward and your head has to stay over your heels. So now you got to fight to stay back. And so now probably your erectors, your back muscles are on all day, trying to fight that. You're kind of in that more anterior tipped position at the pelvis. And obviously you're going to have issues all the way up the chain as soon as you change what's going on at the foot. So I will try to post that.
Yeah, you can't be functioning as we're designed to be from this neutral position. And neutral's like it's just this thing that you move through. You don't like stay in it. Mm-hmm. But over time, I think there's something what I would call asymptomatic dysfunction. So if you're constantly with all those changes to your structure, then that's not going to help in the long term. And you might not have symptoms initially, but in the long term, I think that's where we see a lot of these knee injuries. People need new knees, knee scopes in their 50s and 60s. There's this quad dominant stance because of a raised heel. And we pretty much put our kids in their little Nikes when they're 4 years old. Mm-hmm. And so they're constantly in this position that is changing their structure.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you can stand on, weighted plates, or you stand on a book, you'll see what he means with that quad dominant position, because you'll kind of start, your pelvis will tip forward and you'll bend from the knees. And this is huge in basketball. I actually had a scout, a really well-known NBA scout, ask me this question years ago, and I couldn't answer it. He said, why are all these basketball players standing with bent knees? He came up with that observation, and I didn't really notice it at the time, and then I started looking more and more, and everybody is kind of stuck in that bent knee position, and I wonder if that does play a big role.
So basketball shoes are pretty flat, though, aren't they?
More than running shoes. I think there is a drop. I don't know how big of a drop, but I think there is a drop in most shoes.
Yeah, I would say it's probably between 0.5 and 1 centimeter.
Yeah.
Because of that ankle unlocking that happens if you drive it up too much higher. And so, but if you go down to the local park and people shooting hoops, hardly anyone's in basketball shoes. They're mostly in their trainers, their runners, and that's not ideal,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what about orthotics? I think so many basketball players are in orthotics from a young age. Is there value there? This is one of our most frequently asked questions. People come to us and they have kind of flat feet, and they're like, should I try to go barefoot and strengthen my way out of this, or should I just go to orthotics?
Yeah, I think they've got a place for sure. And just like if you hurt your neck, you might wear a neck brace for a while, but you wouldn't leave it in there forever. And so I think that's the negative part of orthotics, that people leave them there forever. I've got them, and they might be sold or explained that they have a structural problem that is for a forever problem. And no one is anatomically perfect or symmetrical or aligned perfectly. And so we can all function within our own set of, in our own body, basically. But some people might need to strengthen some areas more than others, or mobilize some areas more than others. And an orthotic can help you through an injury, but I don't think it should be there for the long term.
Right.
And in a lot of injuries, you don't even need it in the first place. We're just trying to change. The orthotic is trying to change load, and you can change load in so many other ways. And the negative effects over the long term of an orthotic, I think, outweigh that short-term need. So, there are some injuries that do need it, but not many, I think.
Right. So if you're flat-footed, is that something that first of all, do we even need to worry about that? Or is it kind of just like, you can thrive being flat-footed? Actually, some of our highest jumpers have come to us being flat-footed. And at first I'm like freaking out, but then they're in no pain and they jump out the gym. And so I'm like, what, let me back off a little bit. Is that something that you worry about when you see? No,
I don't. I just see how well they function within that, within their realm of movement. And so a high arch, I think if someone had a high arch, they're more predisposed to certain injuries. If someone has what would be considered a normal arch, they might be more predisposed to certain injuries. And someone with a lower arch or a flatter foot might be more predisposed to certain injuries. But it doesn't mean they need to do something about it. As you said, there are very many highly performing athletes with feet that don't look ideal, And so it's not about, we have to get away from this idea of perfect alignment. It's more about how well they function. And if they've been allowed to function from the word go, like from children, they've probably developed a way to deal with their structure that far outweighs any orthotic or any strengthening conditioning program as well, really. Like our body's amazing, is an amazing problem solver, and working out how the best way to do it. So I think the whole idea of being worried about your flat feet, it's not going to change overnight, but I'm really passionate about letting people know that their feet are fine,
right,
and they just need to, just function within the realm of what it gives them. And if they've got problems, then we can sort that out. But I don't think we need to try and change alignment. An orthotic, originally we were making orthotics to change alignment, but really they don't work for that reason. They just change load. And so it doesn't make any difference. And in fact, most of my clients, a lot of them are people that have been given orthotics for flat feet, and it just doesn't work because it doesn't. It's like it's so counterintuitive if you just understand how the body can perform on its own.
Right. In terms of flat feet, just because we get this question so often from basketball players, how much of that do you think is genetics versus like you had an arch and because of underactive muscles or because of lifestyle, they've fallen over time?
Yeah, I think the fallen arch is like I don't think it's a real thing, really.
Yeah.
Like I don't think you have an arch and then it falls.
Oh, interesting.
I think, I think like the muscles in the arch aren't really. There's a really good study where this guy here in Queensland anaesthetize the nerves that switch on the muscles in the arch. And he then measured arch height, so whether those muscles were on or off. And when they didn't change arch height.
Right.
What it changed was how stiff the foot is as you push off, and it needs to be really stiff so that you can be propulsive and strong. And so that showed us it's not to do with the muscles in the foot that change the arch height. What I think changes arch height is our hips' ability to control the arch. And if you stand there and like squeeze your glutes, someone with a good control will see their arch move when we've activated the bigger muscles around our hips and our trunk, just to keep it simple, you know. And so that is where I might see a foot flattening, where someone sits down all day and their life is like at a desk and then their hips are just offline, you know, they're not looking after that hip mobility or hip strength. And so then we lose control of the feet from that area. And so I don't think the foot itself flattens out. Like it's not like, oh, my muscles in my feet have died, you know, they're weak, I'm going to flatten my foot flattens. It's more that it's a whole body functional thing. Mm-hmm. And that can obviously change. Like I see it change in people. I see their arch height change, but I'm not measuring that as a thing, something to do with their function. Like I just see it because maybe their foot is getting stronger, or their hips are more controlling of what their feet are doing, you know?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Back to that heeled shoe. Like if your hip is constantly in this tilted position, it's getting tight in the hip flexors, not accessing those big glute muscles, hamstring muscles, those postural muscles. And so I think that's where we see the change, when we put someone into a flat shoe and suddenly their hips are able to function in a better way because they're not in this tilted position all the time. And that's when the hips start controlling the arch and we start seeing arch height change.
Right. Yeah. And
does that make sense?
No, totally. That's really good stuff. And then with the zero drop shoes, I think one thing that I've heard, because I've kind of encouraged some of my clients to move that direction, and they feel like they loosen up their calves. Like their calves have been on all day. Especially if you're wearing like the running shoes with the huge heel, and you know, they feel like their calves are always tight when they're kind of standing in those all day. And then when they go to the zero drop, it's like they're finally lengthening. Do you feel like, and it might be a reach, but the increase in Achilles tears or in Achilles tendinopathy, could that have anything to do with standing in a shoe that elevates the heel?
Yeah, so
because you're shortening, right?
Yeah, what's that, sorry?
I said because we are shortening the calf and Achilles, right?
Yeah.
In a shoe like
people
that.
complain about a lot of people complain about tight calves, and they stretch their calves proverbially till the cows come home, and they still have tight calves because they keep putting it back into a shortened position.
Yep.
And so when someone goes to zero drop, one of the things we have to do is be prepared to get sore calves initially, because they're having to work at their natural length for the first time in a long time. Mm-hmm. So to bring it back to Achilles, one of the gold standard for Achilles treatment is an eccentric strengthening program. Every step is an eccentric stretch and load when you're in a zero drop shoe. Like your Achilles is working eccentrically with every step. And so you're basically loading it as it's designed to be loaded when you're in a flat shoe. And so conversely, if you're not doing that because you've got a heeled shoe, then your Achilles is getting weak, is not functioning as it should, and maybe getting weaker than it should. And so then when you impose high demand sport like basketball, for instance, then you're more likely to probably get an issue with that. So I'm not suggesting people go out and start playing basketball in zero drop shoes or their sport, but it's more about their day-to-day life, all those big chunks of time. Like maybe you do play basketball for 10 hours a week, but there's still tens of other hours a week where you can be functional and basically without even doing the work, you're just letting your foot be a foot, and it's getting stronger. Your Achilles is getting stronger just with every step. That's the long-term, more powerful way, I think. Yeah,
absolutely. So the transition into that barefoot lifestyle and into the zero drop shoes, I think the transition is the key, because I also hear from people who maybe go too fast and they transition, they go 0 to 100, and then they're having symptoms of plantar fasciitis or Achilles tendinopathy all of a sudden because I think that transition maybe wasn't gradual enough. Do you have any kind of practical advice on making that transition?
Yeah, well, everyone is different, but I think to start with, if you're barefoot at home is a really good predictor of how well you'll do it. So that's one of the big questions I ask my clients, how much they're barefoot at home. And some people are all the time and they're very comfortable. They get home, kick their shoes off, and they're immediately comfortable. And so that's a good predictor as to how quickly you can transition, I think. Other people might take years to transition and have to do it through varying shoes, because there are zero drop shoes that have cushioning, and then there are ones without cushioning, and so we can just slowly ease people through that. Some people don't have to do any exercises. Other people have to do a whole lot of exercises, mobility and strength work to help them through the transition. So it is very individual, but my first question, like I said, is to ask if people go barefoot at home first and foremost, because if they do, it's a great predictor of whether they're going to be able to go into that way easily. And if they like being barefoot is a big deal as well.
Mm-hmm.
My wife is an interesting example. She's done none of the exercises, none of the transition things, but it's taken her like 3 years to transition because she does nothing that I would suggest.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And do you just kind of recommend like lower intensity stuff, just kind of walking around and then getting into jogging and then into jumping or whatever?
Definitely, yeah. So just for day-to-day wear and building up time gradually. And then like training, I think a great time to practice it is in the gym. Either barefoot or in shoes, because you're far more aware of how activated and switched on you are, and so you're not going to go into those lazy moments of just like hanging out on the end range of motion of your joints. Like you're far more likely to be conscious of the way you're using your feet for that hour that you might be in the gym, and so I think that's a really good place to like I would suggest people go to do that to start with, plus a bit of time just for their day-to-day living. And then just slowly increasing time. Yeah, and then you might have days where if you had orthotics, you go back to your orthotics and your heeled shoes because you did a lot the day before. Mm-hmm. Like often it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back as your feet are slowly getting stronger.
Yeah.
So this is not a magic answer, but it's a long-term goal to build up better strength in your feet, I think.
Right. Now, do you think for somebody like a basketball player, you know, I hear some people who are all into the barefoot stuff and they're like, you shouldn't even be playing in basketball shoes. Do you disagree with that? Like, play in the basketball shoes, but live your life in the normal zero drop shoes?
Yeah, like it really depends on how extreme you are. Like I am a bit of a purist. So I played like over 35s basketball in my Vivos and it was totally fine. Like, but I'm also like doing yoga. I'm looking after my hip mobility, hip strength. Like if my foot is going to roll over because I've changed direction, my hips will, I can be confident that my hips are going to be able to control my foot, okay? Mm-hmm. So and that's a very low level of basketball as well. So I'm not suggesting that people that play basketball regularly and that are at a higher level and, as athletes, we can be very set in our ways. So to change the game day shoe is a big deal. Mm-hmm. But I think it's far more powerful and important to be changing your day-to-day shoe.
Yeah.
And then, because then that time in the game day shoe doesn't matter so much.
Mm-hmm.
I would even say, if you're shooting around, then being in a minimalist shoe, or even probably not barefoot, being in a minimalist shoe is a good practice.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Would you agree? How do you see it?
No, I agree 100%. I think I've tried to get people more into shooting around in the minimalist shoe. And I think, I have theories that I think it can kind of correct some shooting mechanics upstream, because you can kind of get the proprioception back, right? If you're on this thick thing, like you don't know where your feet are in space, and that's your one source of information from the ground. And so now your knees might be in a bad position and hip. And so just like you look at it in terms of, how it could change your alignment, I'm looking at how it could change your shooting form. So sometimes I'll just have them shoot in some minimalist shoes. And one, they don't get hurt. They feel good in it. And two, I think that it's just a theory at this point, but I think that they can make some naturally, kind of subconsciously make some positive changes in their form upstream. Yeah. I do have some people that actually will shoot around completely barefoot, and they're fine. The problem is with wood, as soon as you get sweaty, you start to slip. And so personally, I made the full transition, but I've been playing in barefoot shoes for 10 years now. And so I'm out on concrete, jumping in the Vibram 5 fingers. You know, I'll go dunk and check my vertical and do maximal jumps in those. And I don't recommend that for other people. But it's amazing that my feet have adapted to that. And originally I would think, okay, this is good for my feet, but the impact, right? Like if I'm going to plant maximally, my heel's going to be jamming in, but it's like my bones adapted, and I'm not even sore the next day when I do get that impact to the bone.
Yeah. So there's that SAID principle, the specific adaptation to imposed demand, and our bodies are amazingly adaptable if you just do it slowly. Yeah. And you're now utilizing every part of your body when you're jumping, moving around. Like your foot is not a separate entity. And so it doesn't need to be cocooned and supported. It should be part of the deal. You know, like if you're cutting through the key or something, to have your foot planted and using the all the inside of your legs up into your pelvic floor, because your foot is part of the deal, is far more efficient and far more powerful than having a chunk of rubber on the sole of your foot.
Yeah.
And that's what you're tapping into. And so if you can, if you have the time and patience and education, then it's worthwhile like plugging away at that, you know?
Yeah.
My son is 11 and plays basketball regularly in his little Vivos. And at that age, it's really interesting to see, because all the kids have, you know, the Nikes and their big basketball shoes. And he's an athletic kid anyway. But on the court, he's far more like, it's obvious that he's dancing around because his feet are part of the deal compared to these other kids that have a big, heavy shoe on their foot. Mm-hmm. And they run up and down the court with this heavy tread, you know, and you can hear them running, and he's like dancing on his toes.
Yeah.
Like I said, he's an athletic kid. He might be doing that anyway in other shoes, but it's really, really noticeable. And for kids, and at that level, really, there is no excuse to be getting them used to something that's a compensation, that's going to create compensations. Mm-hmm. Kids should just all be starting out in as minimal a shoe as possible to play basketball.
Absolutely.
And I've heard the argument that, you know, you'll put your foot on someone else's foot and roll your ankle. If that's going to happen, you're going to roll your ankle anyway, whether there's a half a boot up around your ankle or not. That boot is not going to control that type of ankle sprain, is it?
Right, 100%. And for me, is the number one thing when I moved towards the barefoot shoes is the elasticity that I was getting each step. I was getting so much more elastic energy return, and it's something like 50% of your the elastic energy per step comes from the lower leg. And so we're looking at Achilles and plantar fascia. These things should be springy. And if it has a stiff sole shoe, or, you know, now what's popular is the springy insoles.
Carbon plate,
the carbon. And to me, it's like if you're getting that elasticity elsewhere, your plantar fascia and your Achilles are going to go to sleep. They're not going to function properly. Yeah. And so for me, that's the number one thing that I notice is per step, just how much elastic energy that I'm getting compared to in the basketball shoes was huge. So now I'm so used to the barefoot that now when I go to regular basketball shoes, I kind of struggle making that transition now. Because one, they feel so heavy. You're used to moving around with nothing, you know, down there. And so now it feels heavy, but I just don't feel like the same pop per step.
Yeah. And a lot of them have all this cushioning because of what you talked about, that jamming down onto the ground. But as soon as you put cushioning on the foot, your foot stays on the ground for longer. It doesn't, it's like your foot doesn't have to do the work anymore, so it just switches off. And so therefore you lose exactly what you're saying. You lose that ability to use the springs that are naturally there to be used as springs. This is an amazing energy recycling system in our feet and our Achilles that stores energy and releases it with every step. But it has to happen if your foot is only on the ground for a short period of time. Like in running, if we leave our foot on the ground for too long, it just is that energy is dissipated and we lose the ability. And so a cushioned shoe gives you this overstride. And so therefore your foot's on the ground for ages as the rest of your body's coming over the foot. And you lose the ability to spring like that. Mm-hmm. And so we all have it to start with. If we didn't ever put our kid in that cushioned heeled shoe, they would never lose it, and we wouldn't have to go through what you and I have had to go through to transition, you know?
Right. And I think you mentioned a good point about the running mechanics. I think that's something that people have a hard time understanding, is that just by adding cushion to the shoes, you're actually going to change your running mechanics. And correct me if I'm wrong, is that because you now have the ability to heel strike and get away with it? It doesn't hurt, but if I'm barefoot, I can't heel strike?
Yeah, that's one of the big like deal breakers. You can run correctly, obviously. Like you see the world record holder run beautifully in heeled, cushioned, carbon-plated soles. So you can run correctly in these shoes, but they give you the license to not run correctly. Whereas when you have barefoot on, that's the ultimate test to work out your running technique, because it hurts like hell if you don't do it properly.
Yeah.
Really. If you imagine a child running around the outside of a swimming pool, which is always a hard surface, and they're always barefoot, and it's that style that we're after, this short, preppy stride that is just like floating along, as opposed to that striding out, jamming the foot down into the ground. Yeah, so as soon as you put a heeled cushioned shoe on, it takes away from your ability to feel the ground, and therefore your technique is going to be compromised.
Right. As far as like waking up, so you're getting out of these thick-soled shoes and your proprioceptors maybe are a little bit asleep. As far as waking those up and getting that sensory information back in through the feet and through the skin, do you have any advice there? Is it just go barefoot? Or I've heard some people talk about kind of walk on different textures, maybe walk on grass. I know some people do kind of like the walking on rocks and that kind of stuff. Do you advise any of that? Yeah,
so and there's also soles, these insoles that have got extra pricks on them, and I just think nature provides most of what we need. Like I don't think we need to add something to it. But that said, like nearly everyone that I see goes away with a lacrosse ball, like a massage ball, and with deep massage for the sole of the foot as their daily requirement, because that does a lot of things. Our feet are meant to be able to cope with deep pressure, and that deep pressure sends messages to our brain as to where we are in space. So this is helping with balance. It's helping with proprioception, with movement. So if we've been wearing a heeled cushioned shoe for a long time, our body's switched off that mechanism for feeling. And so it's like if I asked you to balance and then close your eyes, you would struggle to balance, because our brain is so used to getting this feedback from our eyes to where we are in space. And so similarly, when we put that big cushion on our sole, our body's switched off from feeling what's happening at the ground, and that's affecting our balance. So to switch that back on, deep pressure is really important. So using a lacrosse ball or something like that to really get pressure into your foot. And then in terms of rough surfaces, it's about just slow exposure. Like there's some surfaces that I still really struggle on, but other surfaces I'm fine on, and then other people wouldn't be. So it really is about slow exposure, and it depends. Like you can get away with not having to do that, but in today's society. But if you want to be like a true barefooter, then it's going to be good for you. The more you expose your feet to texture, the better. But it has to just be graduated. Like if you try and go and walk on man-made gravel, it's often the man-made surfaces that are worst. It's really hard work, like the sharp gravel, little coarse rocks. Whereas if you walk on a forest path, it's usually very soft, and the dirt is soft and the leaves are soft. Like it's quite a nice experience. And so, or grass as well, it's quite a good, nice experience. And every step is different. And that's the issue, I guess, with basketball. The court is flat and hard, and so every step is the same if you're doing the same movement. But the variable is your movement then as well, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I've always felt the best when I get out on uneven surfaces like a trail, natural trail, and just go walking kind of some zero drop shoes. It just feels right. Feels like your feet are getting the stimulus that they need. Every step is a little bit different. So you're re-educating your foot on how to kind of pronate and supinate naturally. We could do that in the gym, but it's really hard to replicate that. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. That's something that I do suggest for people, if they're going to go into that transition, to go into those environments where every step is different. And it does make a hike or a trail run like next level. Like your ability to sense what's around you, like you tend to slow down to start with, which is a positive thing, and just become so much more conscious of your environment that it's like moving meditation, basically.
Right. That's awesome. Now, is there any specific shoe that you recommend for walking around, for training? Obviously, if you're going to go play in the NBA, wear a basketball shoe. As of now, there's probably no solution for a zero drop option there. But like any shoes that you recommend?
Yeah. So the beauty of these types of shoes is I could have one that looks like my work shoe, or I could have one that looks like the one I could run a marathon in, or I could have one that looks like my basketball shoe, and they all just let my foot be a foot. So it doesn't actually matter which one you're using. The only precursor to that would be to say that the sole is sometimes different. So that some have like really heavy lugs for trail running, others have more of a court-based sole, but really they all just let your foot be a foot. So there's some really good there are actually hundreds of different brands. A big one that that you wear is Vibram, the 5 fingers, but a lot of people find that hard to come at because of the way they look. Vivo Barefoot is probably one of the biggest brands in the world. And they've got their range so that you can look at one that looks like a runner to the one that looks like a dressy shoe and everything in between. So they tick all the bases in terms of what it looks like, but they all make your foot function exactly the same. You put this shoe on and it feels the same as the other one. It feels the same as the other one. It's not like you're wearing your office shoes and then you put your basketball shoes on. They all just let your foot be a foot. So it doesn't really matter. It just depends on what you like the look of.
I'm new to the Vivo Barefoots. I get those confused. I'm new to the Vivo Barefoots, and I like those a lot. It is cool that I can wear them to the store without having to explain why I'm wearing them. If I wear the Vibram 5 fingers, I get stopped by everybody, and then I got to go through the whole spiel of why I'm wearing them. I kind of got used to doing that. But yeah, the Vivos, they look like a regular shoe, but they are extremely flexible. You could twist them anyway. And those are a good zero drop shoe as well.
Yeah, there's some good shoes that are what I would call transition shoes, which might be helpful to know. Even Nike made the Nike Free, but that still had quite a heel on it, and it still had lots of cushioning. So I don't love it as a transition shoe. That was their version of a minimalist shoe. And there's a brand called Altra, A-L-T-R-A, and they've got a model that are lower. They're all zero drop, broad in the forefoot, flexible, but with some cushioning. And so this is for some people that can't get away from the idea of cushioning. But like you said, your body should be doing the cushioning itself. It should be doing this adapting to the ground. And so even that is a compromise to have any cushioning if you're going full barefoot, Right.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you for coming on. Hopefully we can do it again someday. Where can the people find you? I'm in Melbourne, Australia, so a long way from you and probably most of your audience. But I actually found out about you through a client of mine called No Limits Basketball. He's got he won't mind me saying, really flat feet, but highly functional basketballer. So that's a great example. Anyway, he's just a Melbourne-based, like, high-performance basketball coach. So I'm online on Instagram as Andy Bryant Podiatrist, and through that I can do online consultations with people around the world. I do a few of them every week, which has been really exciting since COVID, really, because we weren't really shut down, but it was good to have another stream of being able to see people. And so, that way. And then I work at Melbourne Natural Podiatry is the name of my business, and it's in I have 2 locations here in Melbourne. But I do online consults as well, and then on Instagram. Awesome. Well, it's great to talk to you. Great to finally meet you. I've been learning from you for the past couple of years, so it's good to finally actually chat with you.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out. Yeah, it really means a lot.
Yeah, of course. So hopefully we'll do it again sometime soon.
Yeah, cool.
All right. Have a good one, Andy.
You too. See you later.
See ya.